terrorism, this of course will be the big focus, because in an almost what was something in many ways unexpected, terrorism features very prominently, not in one or two or in footnotes, but in several paragraphs of the Xiamen declaration that has been put out. And also what is interesting at this point of time is that China seems to be reassessing its all-weather friendship with Pakistan, because in a very categorical term, outfits such as Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, which operate out of the soil of Pakistan, have been mentioned and condemned in this declaration that has been put out in Xiamen. This is the joint declaration, so it has been arrived through consensus, and this of course is a big victory and a vindication for the stand that India has always been taking. And of course, my colleague Aisha Sindhu continues to be with us. Aisha, a very important declaration here, the Xiamen declaration. Not a lot of people were in fact expecting that probably China would be, pliable enough to accommodate something like this, considering what has been happening in the case of Azhar Masood, where China has always consistently tried to not brand him as a global terrorist. But in this case, China has of course agreed for a joint statement on putting forth on, how terror needs to be tackled, not just in the region, but of course in a bigger context as well.
Absolutely, Saleh, and I think it's broken with tradition in many ways. Just if we look back, for the sake of contextualizing this agreement, just last year at the Goa BRICS summit that India hosted, a country that has suffered on account of terror on multiple occasions, terror somehow didn't make its way impactfully enough into the declaration at the Goa summit. However, much to everyone's disbelief, it has made its way in an impactful way in the Xiamen declaration. And in addition, it's not just about this vague and general reference to what terror does in the South Asia region or globally. There is a specific mention of certain organizations. Now, just to take you through some of those names, and specifically for viewers who are just joining in, I'd like to just read through point number 48 in that declaration. It says, "We in this regard express concern on the security situation in the region and violence caused by the Taliban, ISIL/Daesh, Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, including the Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the Haqqani Network, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, TTB, and Hizb ut-Tahrir." Now, just however, to bring things into focus a little bit more, Saleh, we can't ignore the fact that the TTP is mentioned over here. We can't ignore the fact that the ATIM is also mentioned. So it is a balanced view of terrorism in many ways. China perhaps and other countries sort of making sure that all of the concerns of their allies are referenced as well. But the fact that the LET and the JEM are mentioned specifically is definitely a shot in the arm for India. Absolutely indeed.
Aisha, do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, I'm told that we're also joined in by my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran, who's presently in Xiamen and was also a part of the press meet where Secretary East of MEA, Preeti Saran, just addressed that press briefing. And I'm also told that we are joined by my colleague Daniele Pagani from our international desk. But Ramesh, let me come to you first. This is in many ways a break from the past in terms of the posturing which China had adopted. What possibly could have led China to have agreed to so categorically term terrorism as one of the major issues in this BRICS declaration, the Xiamen declaration?
Absolutely, Mohammed. This is unprecedented in many ways because this is for the first time that China, by virtue of being a member of the BRICS nations, of which India too is a member, has agreed to India's concerns on the issue of cross-border terrorism, especially that which is prevalent in India's neighborhood. And for the first time, in the words of Secretary East of the Indian Foreign Ministry, Ms. Preeti Saran, for the first time, there's specific mention of terrorist groups such as the Haqqani Network, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat-ud-Dawa, Jaish-e-Mohammed. So clearly, there's a consensus building among the BRICS countries, especially India and China, given China's reluctance so far on the issue of a UN ban on Masood Azhar, who heads the Jaish-e-Mohammed group. So clearly, there is some sort of forward movement on this count, even as the issue hangs in balance in the UN. But that said, I did ask the Secretary East a question on how this will play out on the Masood Azhar proscription, and this is what she had to tell me. She says this declaration and the language has been endorsed by all the members of BRICS countries, including, therefore, by extension, China, and that it is obviously approved by all the countries. Therefore, one can expect, the messaging is that the signal of intent on the part of China to at least begin to consider India's proposal for a UN ban on Masood Azhar, which has been pending for a long time now.
Probe you a bit further, Ramesh. You said, will China change its tack in the context of Masood Azhar? For which she gave Ms. Preeti Saran said, the language is something that has been adopted unanimously as part of the declaration, but can we, in concrete terms, expect China to change its tack with respect to the terrorism which emanates from Pakistan, which is specifically targeted against India?
Indeed, that's the sense one gets as well. Remember, this issue has been pending for a long time now, the issue of the proposed UN ban or proscription on Masood Azhar, who heads the Jaish-e-Mohammed group. And as the Secretary East, Ms. Preeti Saran, said just moments ago here on the margins of the Xiamen summit, talking about the declaration, the language, the formulation contained in that, she said this is a manifestation of the consensus among all 5 BRICS countries, including China, and that this has obviously been approved by all the members, and therefore this is a very important development, and this has gone through the consensus process. These are her words, not mine, and therefore to my mind it signals an intent, at least on the part of China, to at least begin considering India's request for a UN ban on Masood Azhar, among other terrorists.
Indeed, Ramesh, do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, we're also joined in by Mr. Swaran Singh, who is a professor at the JNU and an expert on China affairs. Mr. Singh, this is the Xiamen declaration that has been put out. Does it come as a surprise to you at all that China has finally accepted and acknowledged that terrorism is a key issue which India is also battling with?
Very clearly, it's a happy surprise, but let me say, there were some misgivings in India that Chinese initially wanted to create the BRICS Plus, and we were thinking that maybe they want to bring Pakistan on board, and I think it's really far away from where those misgivings were earlier. And now what the situation is that it is being described as a diplomatic coup from Indian side, that a detailed description of several of such outfits have been mentioned by name. And that's very unusual. But remember, some change in Chinese stance was visible even from yesterday as President Xi Jinping addressed the BRICS Business Forum. He did mention that we need to work together to counter terrorism in such a fashion that they should have no place to hide. So India's diplomacy, if that has to be credited, was working for about a couple of days already and was sinking into Chinese leadership. And I think in this whole exercise, the fact that North Korea tested just a day before a thermonuclear bomb, as they claim it, must have created further vulnerabilities for Chinese, because they have to now get distracted, attend to that crisis, which is seen primarily for Chinese to address. And they have been focusing on that issue as well, which must have given a certain traction to Indian diplomats negotiating the wording of the final declaration. And that thing is really showing that Indian diplomacy's rigor and firmness is really delivering in the final declaration. And we saw the spokesperson from India repeatedly saying 5 BRICS countries, and she was not interested in taking bilateral issues. India is really placing it at a larger canvas, as Prime Minister has tried right for last 2-3 years. He's been saying terrorism is not bilateral national issue, it's a regional and global issue. So that was also visible in saying it's a BRICS consensus, and China would possibly fall in line, was implication which was not said directly, but we could hope that in future Chinese position on bilateral issues would also evolve in certain fashion.